and then like a big puddle of yellow piss comes
Oh,
out.
man. Come on, have some composure. Get
It's
your head drilled like a gentleman.
We're talking Phantasm from 79 tonight, and I got my buddy from Two Geeks Different Streets, Mr. Eric Walls. What up, my brother? How we doing?
Doing well, Verno. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. I'm doing quite well. And this is the second time. First of all, really, I appreciate you having the quick turnaround, coming back on Blood Splatter Chatter so quickly to talk about
Yeah.
another 70s film. We just did The Omen. Now we're
Yeah.
doing Phantasm. That one was from 76, this one from 79. Kind of an interesting pairing, right? The Omen's kind of this big Hollywood production. The Phantasm, and I'm really learning more just how low budget it was this week from doing the research and looking into it. Shot for $300,000. That was pretty much borrowed from Don Coscarelli's dad and his dad's friends, like just doctors and lawyers that the dude knew.
Yeah.
And all the actors that you see in it, like most of them are not even actors. They're just people that they grabbed off the street with some aspiring actors mixed in.
Mhm.
But they shot this over the course of like a year, like on weekends, 3 days
Oh,
at a
really?
time. They'd get some more money, they'd find some more
Wow.
time, and then they'd get everybody back and they'd shoot for like another 3 days and spread it out. So there
Wow.
was this really like guerrilla filmmaking, low budget, independent kind of a thing. And you had never, I just got introduced to this movie a few years ago, but you just saw it at your buddy's, he recommended it to you
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
just watched it for your first time. So what is your overall thoughts on the flick, bro?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even heard about this. There's horror franchises I haven't seen that I've heard about, but like this one I had no idea about. Then my buddy on the way back from our other friend's wedding was just like, "Bro, I've been checking out these Phantasm movies," and Don's like, he's got the same kid, and he gets older throughout. He's like, and there's
Right.
little spheres with knives, and they're flying around. I was like, this sounds pretty awesome. I didn't know what really grabbed me about it, but something about it, I was just like, this seems like a fun watch. And then you and me were messaging about it, and you were saying, "Oh, we should do it whenever you get a chance to watch it." And I just sent you a picture of the title screen. I was like, "Found a moment, bitch." So yeah, I had no idea what it was about, other than, oh, it's a cult series that's had a bunch of sequels throughout the years. That's
Bro,
been pretty
I've
low
watched
key.
it 3 times. I'm still not sure what it's about, but go on.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so
and it's
squirrely.
just it has a very it just watching it just felt like, oh, this is a 70s 80s horror movie. It's got a classic score that they use
Mhm.
throughout the entire movie. It's got very much Halloween vibes.
Totally.
And this is a very cerebral type horror movie, unlike a lot of movies that I've seen from that era. It's very trippy, very weird. So I was
Mhm.
down, and rewatching it today, I was like, oh, it's such a good vibe. It's just a good
Right.
vibe movie, and it's got all the elements of 80s or horror films, but also just films of that era in general, such as and especially you saying that they're all amateurs, a really good kid actor.
Yeah, yeah.
It had a little bit of the Goonies mindset. So I was like,
Mhm.
ooh, yeah, yeah. And I love one of my favorite Friday 13th is part 4, where a little kid has to fight Jason. So I was very much down for this.
Little Tommy Jarvis, Corey
Little
Feldman.
Tommy Jarvis.
This guy, like I said, I'd never seen it until recently, but when I did put it on and I saw this kid, I'm like, there's something familiar about his face. I feel like if Steven Spielberg could have got a hold of this kid, like he could have been like a household name, like a
Yeah.
big actor, but I don't think he's done a whole hell of a lot other than this. I'm glad you mentioned that the franchise like carries on. It's one of the rare horror franchise where you get reoccurring characters and reoccurring actors that come
Yeah.
back. I was just gonna run through it real quick because it's interesting how it's spread out. We have this one, the original Phantasm in 79, and then the dude did Beastmaster, by the way. I don't know, I'm a little bit older than you, but I grew up with Beastmaster, and it was like a big fucking deal when I
No,
was
I'm
really
thinking of Transformers Beast Wars.
no,
Right
no, not at all. But so Phantasm in 79, then the sequel wasn't until 88 with Phantasm 2. Then they did part 3 in 94, part 4 in 98, and that was the last time Don Coscarelli directed one, and they just did one, Phantasm
Yeah.
Ravager, in 2016. That was written by him but directed by somebody else.
Yeah.
And as I said, a lot of it, as you said, a lot of the actors are the same going across. I've yet to really dive into it. I just bought this, which is like $25 for the whole shebang bang.
Great
And
cover.
I'll say after watching it last night, because I was always like the couple times I had watched it before, I was like, oh, that's cool that it's a vibe. Like you said the
Mhm.
word right off the bat, like it is. It's very atmospheric. It's unique. It's got the mix of like the old gothic. You got like a lot of cemeteries and the
Yeah,
mortuary, but with this
yeah.
sci-fi and the modern like sci-fi look. We got the clean whites and the
Mhm.
metallic look. So but I thought it was cool. I'm like, I wasn't like blown away
Yeah.
by it. But I will say last night I kind of fell in love with the movie,
Yeah?
watching it for the third time and just really going into it knowing that it's spoiler alert for everybody out there, that it is kind of supposedly all in Mike's head. And the fact
Yeah,
that like
that's
it is
very interesting.
a fever dream and just kind of instead of I think before I'm trying to like I'm poking holes in it. I'm like, this is stupid. Why are they doing this now and that then and whatever? Because it is kind of a non-linear, like not a super coherent tale that they tell. But just
Yeah,
letting it wash over me last night and the music and the look of it, I was like really, really, I just loved it. It's something I could
yeah.
watch any day. Like
Mhm.
it's one of
It
those.
it's definitely one of those movies, like we're saying, if you vibe with the vibe, if you're on
Right.
the same vibrational plane as this movie, it just clicks for you. The first time I watched it with my buddy, I was just in the right mood and watching it, I just thought, this is amazing. I'm just really loving the feel of this movie right now. But I think if you're someone who, like my frequent collaborator who's been on the show, Peter, who always is asking questions and wondering where things come from,
Right.
you might not like this movie because it keeps things relatively vague. It builds
Mhm.
somewhat of a world, but doesn't really. I kind of get the vibes like, oh, this is an 80s comic and it's the first issue. It's
Right, right.
got all these trippy concepts and everything. Like, there's another dimension, but they don't really
Mhm.
talk about
Barely get
how that
into it.
exists or its
I
history or how the tall man is affected by it and that realm.
You brought up last
Cool.
week when we talked about The Omen, you're like, "Oh, it's a very '70s thing," or not
Mhm.
last week, a few weeks ago when we talked it, that it's a very '70s thing to not explain much and just to leave a
Yeah,
lot of things vague. I'm sure in the sequels they get into a lot more of the explaining. They
yeah,
have to. They've got 4 more movies, but he credited Dario Argento's Suspiria with like he watched that prior to making this and loved how they don't explain much in that. And he's like,
yeah.
they really leave it vague. Like, why get into it? And it helps create, like, even just like the tall man himself, not knowing anything about him really adds to like his mystique and like
Yeah.
his clout
I
as a
think
scary
y
dude.
yeah, I think it's this era that we live in movie making. Like, we're in this internet era of also everything's adapted, so even if something's not covered or a character's vague, you would be like, "Oh, where's this character from? What's their history?" And
Right.
that can fill some of the holes. Also, I say this as someone who's grown up with the internet, from, like, as popularized for most of his teens and childhood and everything. When I don't know something, I can find out. I don't
Right.
think audiences today are cool not knowing things, or at least
Right. Right.
executives don't think that. So, back then you'd be like, okay, there's this tall guy from another dimension and he's making midgets, and yeah, that's what he's doing. What's his goal? I don't know. He's taking dead bodies, making Jawas with them. Like,
There's part of the plot, like the very first time I watched the movie, it never even pieced it together that he was making little people. Like, I really didn't even get what the fuck was going on in the movie,
yeah.
which let me go ahead and lay out the plot for anybody that hasn't seen it. I should have done this up front. We basically have this young boy named Mike. Recently, his parents were killed. So he's living with his brother. One of his brother's buddies just dies. So there's all just death in the
Yeah.
air. And he starts
Also
seeing the
suicide. So, like, it opens. I didn't realize on the second watch. I was like, oh my god! It opens with two friends talking about their friend killing himself in a very
right.
chill way. It's just like, yeah, death.
Right. Did you even realize? Because I'm gonna be completely honest, I never realized that the dude in the opening scene was their buddy. The one
Yeah,
that
in the casket.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, no, no. The one that gets killed by the woman in the graveyard in the opening scene, which we find out that is the tall man, that's their
Oh
buddy
yeah.
Tommy. So I
Yeah.
never tied those things together at all. And like I don't think that's necessarily my fault. It
No.
starts out where there's this death that's very significant to everybody else, but we don't know the guy at all. So
Mhm.
it's a little wishy-washy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a super well-written movie, and like they were
No.
rewriting it as they were going, but it's not about that. That
I
actually I
got
think
that vibe. I very much got that vibe that there's a lot of rewrites going on.
it kind of adds to it
Yeah.
in a way. It makes it this like I don't know. I've said this before, but when like I'm going to compare it to The Omen again. This to me is more rewatchable than The Omen. I'm not going to say it's a better made movie, but the fact
Mm.
that you have all these very distinct plot points that the main character in The Omen has to get through. We got the goal. I got to get the knives and I got to get the
Mhm.
kid. And, you know, it gets a little redundant, or not a redundant's not the right word, but it's less rewatchable. This one is just, I
Yeah.
could throw it on at any time from any point in the movie and just sit back and enjoy.
It's like the gift and the curse of a very well constructed narrative. You know, it's so clean and everything's presented to you so well in The Omen that you get it right away. And you're only
Mm-hmm.
going to rewatch it if you really like the performance or you're craving that specifically. Whereas what you're kind of
Right.
saying about Phantasm, there's so many loose pieces and interesting concepts. And just rewatching today, I was thinking, for instance, because I don't think these characters play a huge role in the ending and the overall plot, but they're pretty prominent in the beginning. Mike's friend, the girl,
Mm-hmm.
and the grandma who's like a psychic that's bound to a chair and doesn't
Oh,
talk.
yeah.
I was like, oh man, yeah, they're in this movie, and it's
Right.
kind of key. But then when you get to the end, they just vanish from the plot, which
Yeah.
it didn't need them. It like wasn't begging, like, oh man, we really need that old lady in the chair who uses his grandmother as a talking bird, essentially. Like we didn't need that, but it's interesting because the plot movies like The Omen, when they present a character like that, they intend to carry that character out to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially this character that has this weird psychic link, which is pretty important for this weird, trippy universe that's making.
Right.
But the clearly, as they're writing it and filming it, they're just like, you know, this character is not really that important to the overall thing. Maybe it does happen in the end. I don't know. I didn't rewatch the ending.
No, I don't
Yeah,
think it does. Well, I think that they, and again, maybe they clear this up in the sequels, they kind of make it like she is somehow tied with the mortician in a way because it's her daughter, her granddaughter, that we see later on, like go to the mortuary, and she
yeah,
she goes to the door, but she gets like taken in, and she's
yeah.
surprised by it. So I don't fucking know. I did want to ask you, did you see Dune? Not the newest one, but the
Yeah.
one before. And I'm not going to spoil
Like
anything for anybody that
the
hasn't seen
original
Dune.
original or
No,
like
not
Dune Part 1?
Dune Part One.
Yeah.
Did the scene that we were just talking about, where the grandmother in this movie has
Mhm.
Mike put your hand in this box, and I had just watched Dune recently. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, like
It
Dune
does
stole
have
the.
that.
I searched around on the internet to try and figure out, like, oh, was that scene in the original Dune, or was it in the book, or does this come from somewhere in folklore? And as far as I can tell, this it might be like an original idea from Don Coscarelli and Phantasm, but there's no fucking way that the
Yeah.
dude that made Dune isn't aware of that
No.
because of the
No way.
similarities and shit. I thought it was so cool.
That's really interesting because with Dune, because I read the book so long ago, I don't know what's
Mhm.
added and what's not.
Right.
And that guy's, I'm totally blanking on the director's name, but yeah, he seems like a guy that would watch Phantasm,
Right.
like in his college dorm, be like, "You guys don't get this movie. You guys don't get it."
Two, and I hope I don't compare it too much to The Omen, but to again, when we talked about The Omen, we talked about how this is a movie that I think a lot of people look at is like, oh,
Yeah,
it's like an elevated horror movie from the 70s. It's a deep movie about deep things. And it's really not. They don't
yeah,
explore the themes as we talked about in the Omen review. This movie is so fucking layered, and it's so deep, and it's about death, it's about grief, and it's about this fever dream of this kid. It's basically about like the fucking fear of death you have as a young person, and
yeah.
how scary it is. Like I remember being little and like starting to understand the concept of death and freaking the fuck out when I was little. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to get too
No,
fucking deep if you're not
no.
cool
I
with it.
mean,
But do you
I'm
remember
cool with
that?
it.
Like
Yeah,
learning about death and that fear?
I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I think the concept of death, because I had a lot of family deaths when I was very young. I went to a
Yeah.
lot of funerals, and you don't really realize, like, it was one of those things that was in my mind, and then a few years later I was like, huh, oh yeah, that's crazy. So I definitely was like a kid that had
Right.
death on my mind a lot, and then just
Same.
suddenly it hits you. And what got me about this movie, speaking to that, like when I would go to funeral homes or churches and everything, I read this on Wikipedia. I think it was the director talking about it. What's the director's name again?
Don Coscarelli.
Don Coscarelli. Oh, Don Cascanara. He was saying how in funeral homes and stuff, we just give them bodies and
Yeah.
we don't see them, and we kind of just trust them to do anything like things. And this is kind of dealing with that. This guy's taking the dead bodies, crushing them down in little like Costco vats, it seems, and turning them into little midget Jawas and like little servants for him. And it kind of, and it's ludicrous and everything, but it I think it works because it comes from this very real thing of we don't know what happens to bodies when we give them to morgues and funeral homes and all these things. We trust it, but you know, it's this mystery in the world unless you're in it, and it's a very personal thing and a very but at the same time we don't want to think about it. And it kind of takes this concept and makes the weirdest thing. Like he's squishing these bodies and putting them in little hoods, and they're in another dimension, and you don't even he doesn't really have a goal, it seems. It just seems that this is his nature. It's really fat, but it has this whole vibe, you know, like you were saying, a kid dealing with death and processing it. And even when you're watching the first time, you're like, oh, dead parents. But then you on a rewatch, you're like, dude, this whole thing is about his brother's gone, and that's like a pillar that he is fantasizing what his life would be like if he had it. And that's really fascinating. And kind of speak to what you were saying about The Omen versus this movie. What we were saying a lot about The Omen was it was kind of foundational to a lot of horror movies, especially of the following decade, with but because of that didn't really have a lot of elements that things that inspired it had later. But this one is on the opposite side. It's kind of this more weird horror movies that get cult followings that maybe weren't hugely popular or well received, but over time have just built this following and become renowned within the horror community. And those are like two very key sides of the horror industry. And this one definitely, because it's one of those things, like I mentioned it to a few people at work. I was like, oh, I'm watching Phantasm, and 80%, no idea, never heard of it. Like it kind of sounds dirty when you say it and you don't know it's a movie. You're like,
they're gonna be like, oh, the one with Mickey Mouse. Yeah, that scared me when I was a kid.
Yeah. And then just like one or two people when I was like Phantasm, like, oh dude, that's a great movie. Like they really were about that movie. And I really watching the first time, I was just like, shit, that was fun, man. That was a good vibe. And it's fun in dealing with these, what we were talking about, this concept of a kid dealing with death, and it kind of makes you remember when you kind of realize that was a thing. Oh shit, yeah, we're all gonna do that, aren't we? Kind of takes that. And it has this really fun adventure.
What I think is interesting, this is something I realized kind of recently, and maybe it's fucking obvious to most people, but almost everything in horror is death. Like almost every horror monster is just another way to represent death. And this is what made me fall in love with zombies so much recently. I used to like the argument fast zombies or slow zombies, but I heard someone talk about how slow zombies are such a perfect representation of death because it's coming no matter what. It seems so easy to avoid. I can just dodge it forever, but eventually you're going to slip up or it's going to get you, or it could get you at any point. And if you look at just like the universal monsters, Dracula, dead, Frankenstein, dead, the Mummy, dead. And even like Jason Voorhees, why doesn't he run after people? It's because he's death. He doesn't have to run. He's gonna get you eventually. Michael get you eventually. And this is such like an on the nose representation of death with the mortician in the mortuary, in the graveyards and all that. But the way there was a moment at like towards the end of the movie where Mike is running from the tall man. And I'm just thinking like, oh God, what a good representation this is of death. And right as soon as I thought that, two gravestones pop up out of the earth and like they're attacking him. And I'm like, oh God, like that's such a great visual representation. And the visuals are amazing.
Now that you're mentioning all these things, I could see the graves dragging him and everything being, you know, like a representation of his survivor's guilt, which he probably has. And that sequence just such a simple sequence. Doors bust open. There's the tall man, and he's just walking, like you're saying, walking. He's coming. Mike's running, and then just, you played a good game, boy. Like it was such a good sequence. And now just you mentioning all this stuff's like, oh my God, there's this huge layer to it. Whereas for me, it was just, and maybe this is why this movie just developed such a following. It's just a fun, trippy kind of movie. if you're just in the mood for that, like a B movie, it
Mhm.
perfectly fills that. But then at the same time, it's got these kind of deeper themes that make you think, but only if you're willing to engage on that level. Like you
Right.
don't need to have that. If you're like, I don't want to think about death right now. Let me just watch this movie about weird little midgets. I can't get over the midgets. Like this is
I know. Um, uh, yeah, so, you mentioned the music, I guess you already touched on that, but to me, that's, like, so, like it's, like, 80% of what makes this movie special, and I think if I'm doing the math correct, this came out let me double check. This came out in March of '79, which
Mhm.
is just 4 months after Halloween came out, which is
Oh
interesting.
wow.
I know, and they had been working on this thing for, like, a year and a half before that, because there was a year worth of filming, then, like, a half year worth of editing.
Yeah.
So, it was also and it was conceived before Star Wars and the Jawas.
Yeah.
The
Oh, I
little
didn't.
people in this one is conceived before the Jawas, supposedly, and so that's all fucking interesting. The score,
Yeah.
he, uh he mentions Goblin, who did a lot of Dario Argento's stuff, and I definitely feel that. What about the cast? Who sticks out for you? We'll touch on the tall man in a minute, but what did you think of just the overall the 2 brothers and Reggie are basically the
Yeah.
ice cream
That's
guy
the
and the 2
trio.
brothers.
The trio, and then the only characters outside of that are like hot chicks, the friend, and the old lady.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the two brothers. I probably say this as someone with a brother,
Mhm.
just really vibe with it. Mike is the kid playing Mike. I can't remember what I watched just before watching this. I was watching something new with like a really shitty kid actor, and I'm very forgiving of bad kid acting.
Mhm.
But when it's good, I was like, wow, this kid's just nailing it. And I'm just like, what were they doing in the 80s? Did people just were more in touch with their childhood that they could direct kids better? I don't know. And then the Bond, I liked it the brother because at the beginning of the movie, you think it's gonna be, oh man, the brother's just be like, it's not real, get over. Like he's gonna be the authority, you know? And
Right.
then as soon as the kid's like, hey, I have a finger that's moving in a box,
Right, right.
he just looks and it's like, okay, I believe you. And they're a team from then on. Reggie, great, kind of the more comedic character, the ice cream truck
Mhm.
salesman. I as soon as he came on camera, I was just thinking, even if it was a low budget movie today, you would never have a bald man with a ponytail in a movie
Oh
today.
my
You just wouldn't. You just would.
god. Just cut one or the other, man. The ponytail's gotta go, or maybe a hat. Maybe a hat would have done him well.
Yeah, probably a hat. Also, it's just one of those things. I'm like, this guy would look good with a shaved head. I don't know why. Like he
Yeah.
needs. I
You
don't
know what?
know. I can't relate. I'm not a balding man, but maybe he's just trying to hold on to his youth. He's an ice cream. I would not let my kid buy ice cream from that man.
I know I'm pretty sure that he's like a mainstay in the series, so that is something I look forward to keeping a close eye on is what they do with his hair as the series goes forward. The brother, just their relationship, I did really dig it, and especially now looking back on it and knowing the way that the story goes, where the older
Yeah.
brother is actually dead. Because the first time I'm watching, I'm like, dude, what a piece of shit you are. You're like, I'm my brother, all he does is follow me around. He's worried that I'm gonna leave him after our parents died. And I'm gonna leave him with my aunt and uncle. He's like, but how about the older brother on his bike? Like when they show him riding the bike, I'm like, is this supposed to be funny? How did they not like was that not funny in
Oh yes.
1979?
Go play a good game, boy.
You got anything to say on the tall man? I guess we've kind of already touched on and what he represents and everything, but the dude's name is Angus Scrim. I know he was in like at least 4 of these. I don't know if he was alive. I'm actually kind of curious
I
to
think
look
he
into
was
it.
in the newer one as
The
well. Like
2016 one?
I'm just thinking about through my Wikipedia surfing that I think he was in all of them. This is incredible that this was such a long lasting franchise. And when it came back, because I think the last one before the new one in 2016 was like 1998, you said.
Yeah, yeah.
It's incredible. They were just like, let's continue it. Let's not reboot in the era of horror reboots.
Right.
It's just maybe this one, it does not have the household name enough to justify a reboot.
No.
It would be
Y
smarter to do it like as a continuation.
I was gonna say, like, something going back to what you were mentioning earlier, as far as this is like one of the big names that isn't a big name. Like you said, like if you're not like a big horror fan, there's a good chance you've probably definitely never seen this, and there's a good
Yeah.
chance you've never heard of it. I was gonna say, oddly enough, to me, I think Evil Dead is the biggest of those franchises. It
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
I didn't grow up watching Evil Dead. I bet if you were to walk up to most people on the street and be like, "Who's Michael, Jason, Freddy, blah blah blah," they all know. But then
Yeah.
say, "Who's Ash?" and they're probably not gonna know. And I think a lot of people in the horror community be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like he's huge.
Ash Williams.
Yeah, but I don't think
Bruce
they're.
Campbell?
You grew up watching that shit, but I don't know. I don't know why I'm bringing that up now, but
No. It's definitely an interesting point in this movie. But to go back to your question about the tall man, because I think I just skipped over that.
oh, sorry.
It's just his presence is it's a simple performance. You know, I'm not saying he's a bad actor, but it's simple in the fact that he's not doing much, and that really shows how great a performer he is because he's standing there and it's just like literally when he walks in the door, he's just like,
right.
He has like 3 lines in the whole movie, and they're pretty just impactful. Like I've just been hearing "You played a good game, boy" in my head so much because he's got a good voice without it feeling try hard. Like he has a menacing stare without him like, you know, you can tell in movies where it's like,
he's got the eyebrows for it.
Yeah, he's like much more like somber about it, and that kind of makes him scarier. And just I love that it's just called the tall man.
Right.
Because I'm a tall man, but whenever I encounter someone like 2 or 3 inches taller than me, I'm like, holy shit, that's terrifying.
Right.
So if I'm like 5, if I'm a kid and like a giant, I'm like, oh my god. So just a tall man is a very real low budget thing to do because tall people can be fucking scary,
fucking terrifying. It's freaky. What the hell are you doing that tall? The other thing they do well is just like the way that they write him and they build up the mystery of him. Just seeing him pick up the coffin, gets his finger cut off, you know, like he's even at the end of the movie, which is why like I'm glad that I haven't watched the sequels yet, that I've watched this a few times and really let it sink in before going on. Because this is the type of movie that I'm almost afraid the sequels could ruin a little bit, take away some of the mystique from it. Like he's so mysterious. The world, like what the hell he's doing with the dwarves is very mysterious. I'm sure we're gonna go there, and I have a feeling it's not gonna pay off. But,
yeah, I mean, it's like the dimension itself, because I think it's the dimension where he creates the dwarves. That gravity is so strong that it compresses them down into dwarves essentially because they're regular bodies. It's one of those things. It's some wild stuff. Like you knew that this is the era of drugs, like right now. Because it's like that's crazy. Like they're like, let's make it a little bit scientific, you know. But speaking of just also it's just one of those movies you don't really know what's gonna come at you. Like there's the one scene in the funeral home with that one guy giving Mike a hard time, and then a metal sphere comes out of nowhere with a blade, and I just remember like, oh, but then a drill goes into his head, and it's a really good effect, and blood's just coming out. And as soon as that, and it's like you can see it's low budget, but I'm also at the same time like, oh God.
Well, the piss too, like the way that the piss starts. Okay, this is something I'm glad I listened to the commentary on. First of all, J.J. Abrams, all right, of Lost fame, The Force Awakens, and all that. He wanted to do a screening. He loves this movie, and he wanted to do a screening. And he talked to Don Coscarelli, and Don Coscarelli embarrassingly told him that it looks like shit. I don't have a good version of it. And J.J. Abrams says, "Oh, well, I'm J.J. Abrams. I'll have it remastered." So that's why when you put the movie on, it says "Bad Robot" at the beginning of it. He had it remastered just so that he could watch it.
Dude, he's living the nerd dream.
But anyway, the reason I bring that up is supposedly you could never see that piss before then. They said it never would have made it through the censors at the time.
I didn't even notice the piss, honestly. Like, is he peeing himself while he's getting his head drilled in?
When he falls to the ground afterwards, like Mike's like cowering in the corner, and you just see the guy's legs, and then like a big puddle of yellow piss comes out.
Oh man, come on, have some composure. Get your head drilled like a gentleman.
It's one of the few things, because I was gonna say this is, and I still would say this is a really good like starter horror movie. Maybe not now for like a modern kid because it's so old and dated.
Starter old school horror movie.
Yeah, like back in the day, give them this, give them Poltergeist, give them a swat on the ass, and send them on their way.
And a cigarette.
Speaking of, do you have anything else you want to add before we grade this thing? I've got a moment or two that I was going to highlight, just random things. You got anything you want to throw out there before we get into the grades?
I mean, the one thing that I'm just thinking of, it's not really a context, is when they kind of learn a little bit of the history of the tall man, which I'm sure we'll learn more about in the sequels. He's got a top hat in the olden times, and then he's just in a photo, then suddenly the photo becomes real and looks at him.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah, that was such a good vibe. I don't know. I just a lot of moments. It's one of those things I'm kind of, we were talking about in The Omen how there's certain shots and moments that have been parodied throughout
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of media. I'm just a bit shocked that nothing, at least that I know of, like, I'm just kind of like, why haven't The Simpsons done a little
Right.
joke about this, in a
Right.
Treehouse of Horror or something? It's a little shocking because there's a lot of iconic visual moments to me.
Totally. For me, it's mainly, and I've said this on the show a lot recently, like I'm a fan of tone, atmosphere, and like good music. When the music is hitting, it
I mean,
really
you
adds a
need
lot.
tones for good music.
You do, but that's what it is in this movie. There's so many good shots, and there's so many like slow, long, drawn out shots that pay off and sink you into the film and in the atmosphere. Another moment that is something I was going to point out is that photo bit and the way that they redo that in the 1990 version of it, and actually in the book it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's like taken straight from Phantasm. I'm pretty fucking sure this came out before it was written. It was
Definitely like in the 80s, like 1980 something.
Yeah. And which that's another thing. Like this is 3 years older than The Omen, but how much more 70s did The Omen feel, and how much more like on the verge of the 80s does this feel in 79?
Yeah.
There's such a difference in the feel.
It's crazy. When you were saying in the beginning, it was a 3-year difference. It just felt like Phantasm came out when horror was more established.
Totally.
But I guess it really wasn't. I mean, Friday the 13th wasn't a thing.
Right.
Halloween wasn't a thing. Yeah, I mean, maybe 4 months before, but when it was being made, it wasn't.
I think
like all these
independent film was becoming more established.
Yeah.
And independent horror rather than just, what was coming out of Hollywood.
This is definitely like, if you're an aspiring filmmaker, a student or something, this is definitely a movie to watch to know how to do like a low budget horror movie well and be iconic and not like cliche, because there's nothing cliche about this movie.
No.
Like, you cannot like this movie, but you cannot call it like a basic movie.
Right. It's incredibly original, which is another thing. That's another thing like I appreciate so much in film. But a stupid ass moment that I had to point out, this is the silliest thing to basically wrap it up on, is when the older brother Jody is giving Mike advice. He's like giving him a gun. He's like, no warning shots. Warning shots are bullshit. He's like, if you shoot to kill. It's like, who the fuck told you that? Who put that slogan on a t-shirt? Like, who cares? Like, if you shoot someone, what if I want to shoot him in the foot? What if he's coming at me and I don't want to kill him? It's like, no.
Yeah, what if I don't want to murder someone, but I just want to stop them from attacking me? It was funny because the beginning of that is like good. It's like, don't point your gun unless you intend to shoot them. And then he says, don't shoot someone unless you intend to kill them. And I'm kind of like, okay, I agree. You shouldn't shoot someone but if someone's attacking you, you can shoot them and not kill. Like, it's one of those things. I'm like, there's some gray areas there. But maybe this guy's just feeling hot. He hooks up with women in graveyards. Like, maybe he's just not the best authority figure on that. Also, I just found it interesting that it feels a bit like something that they delve into more. The fact that the tall man disguises himself as women a lot and seduces men. That to me, it just feels, the fact that that's like a low-key thing in the movie, don't mind, but it's one of those things I'm like, this is kind of untapped potential. It's also that classic thing of like old horror franchises kind of having a little bit of like, sexual and gender fluidity in movies before that really being a thing.
Right, more coded,
like a societally acceptable thing, rather.
Right,
it was always a thing, but it's one of those things that's very interesting because there's parts where there's like a really hot girl staring at a guy, and I'm like, that's an old giant man pretending to, and he is great at picking up dudes.
Totally. Like, oh my god. Well, yeah, when Jody, the older brother, comes in, literally like sits down at the bar. 30 seconds, they're up and they're off, headed to the graveyard.
He had a line ready, clearly.
Yeah. I do love it. Like the couple times that they do it, where they switch the faces out from the lavender girl, which is I guess what they call her because she wears lavender dresses, and the tall man, and just like the close-ups that they do of when they do that switch out.
Like,
but hell yeah, man. Yeah. Let's wrap this bitch up, man. This was a blast. I'm so glad that you decided that you were up to join me for this one. So
anytime, man.
You're my go-to 70s guy.
But, all right. Right.
You
Call me
guys
Eric
down?
Foreman, baby.
You guys watch it in the premiere. Let me know if you've seen Phantasm. Your rating out of 5. I'll go ahead
And let us know if you saw the piss, because I'm curious how many people saw the piss, because I missed the piss both times.
if you smelled the piss, then make sure you put that down there as well.
And call a doctor. You should not be spelling that. That was a movie.
Give me a out of 5 flying silver balls.
It's one of those things I feel like whenever I go on the show, I'm very methodical with my rating system. But for me, it was a 5 out of 5.
Oh, hell yeah.
It was just a fun movie. What it was doing, because to me, it's not like all encompassing, but what this movie was trying to do and how it did it, being a fun, cheesy horror movie with these weird, and talking about it now makes me appreciate it more. It's like these deeper themes that you can appreciate, but also if you don't want to have a movie that you have to think about and just want to see a movie with silver balls killing people, that has that too. It's doing what it has been trying to do so well that I'm like, this is kind of the perfect movie for what it's trying to be. It's a 5 out of 5 to me, and it should not be as fun. As soon as I started up again, like today, I put it on. I was like, I don't really want to rewatch this. And I was like, God, I love this movie.
I know. I do that all the time, bro.
Yeah.
First of all, I appreciate that you sat down to give it another go for the show. I really do, man. But I do the same shit where I'll have this like, I watched it a couple weeks ago. I don't feel like watching it again. But then there's certain movies that you could just sink into so easily, and this is one of them. And it's that score helps, and that it's never annoying. There's no annoying characters. It's just like a chill. You can tell, like, let's not fucking ever be annoying in this flick. I love that you gave it a 5. I almost feel like I want to bump mine up, but I'm gonna stay strong with a 4.25. I think it's so watchable.
Yeah,
the music is so good. It's so beautiful to look at, and it's just unique too.
Yeah,
like you can as I said before, it's a film. Just let it wash over you, and I can't wait to dig into the sequels, man. I'm hesitant to do it. But I'm gonna do it. I'm really looking forward to I might throw one on tonight.
It's one of those classic ones that it seems that it was financed by different studios each movie. So
really?
Jump around. Well, I saw because I watched it on Amazon. The first one, second one you had to rent. Third one was available for
streaming. So glad you brought this up, dude. The only reason I really bought this, first of all, I wanted the commentary. It's the only thing I got extra. There's no special features or no other special features. This is on like Amazon Prime. It's on a few different streaming services, but they never have part 2. I don't know why. I would have watched this whole franchise a long fucking time ago, but nobody puts part 2 on there. So finally, and maybe that's why. Maybe they don't we'll get Verno to buy the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like with Evil Dead, because Evil Dead has so many interesting things because they're just low budget and different studios fund different things, and So, Army of Darkness is called Army of Darkness because a different studio owned the rights to the name Evil Dead.
I did not know that.
Evil Dead 2 starts out with like a recap of the first movie, but they reshot it with different actors.
Right.
Because they technically didn't own the rights to the first movie. The studio did. And a different studio is making the second one. So as soon as I saw, there's a weird streaming thing, I'm just assuming the directors and everyone went to different studios and did whoever can and being like, this won't be a problem because it'll come out in theaters and maybe tape, and that's what movies are right now.
Right.
I just know the second one I was hesitant to watch because the second one apparently this was very controversial in the Phantasm community. It's the only one where Mike is played by a different actor.
Get the fuck out of that.
Yeah, the second one. The second one, and that's really interesting. You expect it to be like the fourth one or something,
right?
But I saw a clip. I saw a thumbnail on YouTube, and it had older Mike from like the third or fourth one. And he's like an adult, but apparently the second one they recasted him, and I guess everyone was so mad about that they told him, and they're like, "We need you."
Awesome, that's interesting. I'm glad actually you told me that now, because I would have been really thrown off and confused when I put the second one in, just because I'd been hearing that they have a consistent cast. So, all right, well, perfect, man. I appreciate the shit out of you. I appreciate everybody in the chat. You guys are absolutely awesome. Make sure you hit the like button, sub up to the channel if you're not, which if you're here at the end of the episode and you're not already subbed up, you're just kind of a dick, honestly. So
also get priorities in straight. Why are you watching a video? It's like we wrapped up like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, come on.
You're in or you're out. Just commit, you know? Like, you're in it clearly if you're this far. Fucking commit. Put a ring on it.
As people
you're
are
in
like,
it.
click, fuck them guys. But all right,
It's coming. Fuck Eric.
Go back, check out the episode we did hopefully last week on Late Night with the Devil. Big deal. I had a great conversation about that with the homies. So go check that out and stay tuned. Follow me on Instagram if you want to find out what I'm doing next week at blood.splatter.chatter. So thank you guys so much. Eric, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks a ton, Verno. Peace out, everyone.